think of, when I go through it, I'll think of it again. Stevens.
Well, I think it's right.
No, he knows it. Mitch. Thank you. Mitch Stevens.
Mitch.
There's one more Mitch that left Rocky when he said, I'm going to this one, but I'd rather be back in the Tennessee area.
Yeah.
We went out many years ago to Rocky Point and gospel meetings.
Yeah. His grandfather was a preacher in Glover City.
Oh, yes. He's a music guy, isn't he?
Yeah, it was that too, yeah.
Mm-hmm. My husband knew of him.
Yeah. So let's try. And his dad, Bill, is a full-blooded Indian. So they got all the Indians there background. You've got two more kids now.
I think so.
Which does. Yeah. Someone left this on that.
That's real nice when you're checking one of these.
Hello. What a pleasant smile.
I don't feel bad, really. No more shrimp. Ever. Try shellfish. All of it. Only from shrimp? Ever.
That's how we can both work. somebody asked me my mom that,
Lady Carly. Carly actually said that.
she wasn't
I'm gonna find out.
Yes, we are. Introduction to Esther. I love Esther also. Great story. It's good to see you, Rob. You two kids, but you've been ill, so I just wanted to mention that.
well, I know what she's going through. I've done everything.
Oh, really?
Both have.
So I mess you up. Yeah. She looks so better.
I did. But just took over everything.
Outside,
Like,
under the heat.
an hour and a half before she had such a big action.
All right.
I wasn't the best one at all. Just had the big
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah. Well,
We're not picking up.
we just did that. So we had to break that, and that was supposed to happen. She was supposed to happen.
All right, well, let's get started here. All right, our agenda for the night is primarily introduction. We're not really going to get into the story itself. We'll read a few things, I'm sure, along the way, incidentally, but it's just good introductory material. Going to be covering a little bit of the background and the history and the context, and then a little bit of kind of addressing some of the textual criticism surrounding the story itself and its place in the scriptures. So, with all that being said, let's start with a quick word of prayer. We'll get into it. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we do thank you for another beautiful day. We do thank you so much for our church family and for all that you do for each of us. There are a number of our members who have been going through really difficult times physically, and some who have been healed and are on the upswing, and we're so thankful for that. Thankful for successful surgeries and effective medication. We're thankful for rest and the way that you've designed the body to heal itself over time with many, many of our ailments. We thank you for your providential care, as we're going to talk about in the story of Esther, that even when you do not intervene in some miraculous, grand way, as you have done so often in the scriptures, even when you're just behind the scenes, God, we know that your hand is in everything. We know that you are powerful and that your will is done in heaven and on earth. We're so thankful for all these and so many other rich blessings. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Remember I said at the beginning of the quarter, Ezra and Nehemiah is one book in the Hebrew Scriptures, and that is why I wanted to study them together. Even though Esther kind of is tucked in there in the midst of Ezra and Nehemiah, I just thought it would be really good to just, let's just stick with the fact that Ezra and Nehemiah was one continuous story, one continuous book, one text. And let's let Esther just stand on its own as its own text without any interruptions. So let's get into it here. Hopefully. There we go. I want to start off by talking about three main themes from this book. And we'll start with providence. Providence. I know all the material's up there already. I don't feel like fiddling with progressing every point forward, so I'm just going to have everything up on the screen at the same time. This is one of the main themes of the story of Esther. And while we do see that God intervenes in the affairs of man by great miracles in the Bible, whether you're talking about changing all the languages at the Tower of Babel, whether you're talking about the Exodus account and the Red Sea crossing at Mount Sinai, making the sun stand still so that the day of battle goes in favor of Israel, whatever it happens to be, Jesus walking on water or being raised from the dead, God does intervene in the affairs of man miraculously. But God also more frequently intervenes by providence. And I know that, again, don't look, you can look, it's fine. When I say the word providence, what does that mean to you? Like, give me your definition of providence. What's that word conjure up?
Meant to be.
Okay, something that's meant to be? Yeah. So if it's God's will, it's going to be done. Okay, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, but there are things you can do to be a part of it, to participate in it. It's kind of like a train rolling on down the tracks. Trains don't stop, right? It takes like a mile, like 1 or 2 miles for a train to come to a complete stop. Okay, trains don't stop. So there's nothing you can do to stop it. But there are things that you can do, choices that you can make to adapt to the fact that the train is moving. You can be a part of that providence, or you can fight against it. Either way, the providence is going to happen. What else does the word providence conjure up when I say that word? Yeah, Mike?
I think a lot of providence is not necessarily like a request or granting some kind of request, unless it goes along with God's will in order. I think there's a means of salvation where there's salvation that's also attached to providence, right?
Yeah.
So God went through an enormous amount of effort in order to save His people in the book of Esther.
Yeah.
And you see that over and over again when it comes to someone hearing the word or being saved. God does an enormous amount for them.
Yeah.
But if you looked at the book of Esther and looked at the end and said, hey, Mordecai ended up with a giant house of Haman, and said that must have been providence, I think you missed what providence was talking about.
Yeah.
It's not talking about getting stuff or all kinds of other things. It was the salvation and everything that God did that led to the salvation of His people. I think that's sometimes where we get carried away with providence.
Yeah.
Is it really God's will for all these things to happen if it doesn't lead us towards someone's salvation or spreading the gospel?
Yeah, that's a good point. Rebecca, I want to get to you, but Justin, were you going to respond to Mike before I get to Rebecca?
Say, when I think of providence, I think it's a relationship to the prophets, prophecy. But it's more of a later to me. It's like perspective. When you think of prophecy, you think of, well, this was God's prophecy, pick a prophet, they would deliver a message before it's happened.
Yeah.
And then providence is like, after the fact, you then have a chance to take a look at it with a new perspective.
Yeah.
And you go, look at all the things that this lined up, and now you're like, this was providence. There's no way that this could have happened any other way God intended this to happen.
Justin, that's a good point. So I agree with you there that sometimes a miracle, right, a direct miraculous intervention is always obvious in the moment. When the Red Sea parted, it didn't take them like 10 years. Like 10 years later, they weren't going like, say, did the Red Sea part for us? Maybe that was God. No, they knew it in the moment. Providence is the sort of thing that you look back on it and you go, at the time I didn't get it. I didn't understand what was going on. I see now the way that things lined up. They kind of fell into place along the way in a way that I never could have guessed or anticipated, but God had an outcome in mind. And that gets to what you were saying, Mike, is that Esther, we're going to talk about the fact that God is not directly mentioned in the book of Esther, and I like the way that you put it, God's handiwork is all over this book. It's incredible effort on God's part. And I want to make one more comment, and then I will get to you, Rebecca, I promise. I like the way you put it, Mike, that God's incredible effort in Esther. We think that a big miracle is more effort than providence. Now, let's be real. To a God who is omnipotent, is effort even a relevant statement to make? No, not really. I mean, if you're omnipotent, effort is irrelevant. All right? I'll say it again. If you're omnipotent, effort is irrelevant. Creating 1 star or 10 million stars, if you're omnipotent, is irrelevant. So, it's not really a matter of effort, but the way you put it, Mike, is if God wants to destroy the army of Sennacherib outside the gates of Jerusalem, and he wants to send one angel, and in a night can kill 180,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night, boom, done. I sent one angel, killed a bunch of Assyrians, done, saved ya. But what he does in the story of Esther is tiny micro adjustments that involve dozens or hundreds or thousands of people's lives, thousands of choices of thousands of people's lives over many, many days, little tiny nudges. So in reality, killing Sennacherib's army was one thing that God did in a night. Doing what he did in Esther actually required more exertion, more activity on God's part to bring it about. So while somebody might say, yeah, providence, like I'll believe in God when he shows me a big miracle in the sky, like, miracles are easy. That's easy stuff. Walking on water is easy. But figuring out the character of Judas 3.5 years before Judas ever betrayed Jesus, that's providence. All right, now Rebecca, go ahead.
It's sort of just been said now. It's like the providence yeah. Thanks for that. Providence is the sneaky underwriting of history.
Yeah.
This is God coming right out and speaking through a prophet and saying, I'm going to do this so that this outcome will happen. He just does it, and then
I agree with
so
her.
friendly that you can look back and see it happening.
Yeah. And that is a very good point. And that's the value of hindsight. You can look at the Old Testament, especially the witness that's provided by the Dead Sea Scrolls. And Jonathan and I love to talk about the historical text and everything, but Dead Sea Scrolls is a document dating to at least around 300 BC, and you can read about a lot of the Messianic prophecies, including Psalm 22, Psalm 110, Isaiah 53, Deuteronomy 18, etc., 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 the book of Zechariah, like the whole thing. And you can read about Messianic prophecies that literally, scientifically, are absolutely 100% documents that existed 350 years before Jesus ever existed, and go, oh, yeah, born in Bethlehem. Okay, I get it. All right, of a virgin. Ah, okay, yeah, man of sorrows. All right, tender like a blade of grass. Ah, okay, yeah. They cast lots for his garments. Like, how did you know that? How did you know that they cast lots for his garments? Like they pierced my hands and my feet. No, what? How'd you know that? That's providence. Dan, sorry, Gary. Gary,
you shot right by you.
Yeah.
I noticed that you've got Latin up there for the Latin word for providence. Is providence a biblical word like Hebrew or Greek?
That is a good question. No, not in the sense. Yes, it is a Latin word. The word providence comes from provideo, to see something before. I mean, that's what it literally means. Is the sense of it is to convey activity that arises from foresight. Okay, that you can see something before it happens. But no, there's not really the sense of providence in the Greek or the Hebrew. It's not a word that you actually see. I mean, in the Bible. I mean, off the top of my head at least. But that God does have activity behind the scenes, I think, is apparent from a lot of scriptures. The book of Isaiah, for example, talks about God calling his servant from a distant country, and what God wants to have happen is going to happen. A bird from the other end of the world, God can call birds, and it will come about just exactly the way that he wants. Gary, go ahead. Now you have a thought. Go ahead, Gary.
I'm thinking that there's so many folks that misunderstand providence, and they misconstrue it or misuse it, like when a child dies, or when their loved one dies, or when things like that happen. and inevitably there's someone that says, "Well, it's the will of God." God, it's God's providence. Well, I don't see it that way. I think that life happens, and providence has to do. It's like we talked about earlier or Mike mentioned it about how providence is things that move to salvation, that bring us closer to God. And I think that our world just misconstrues that everything that happens in the world is God's plucking someone out of the world.
Yeah, that's kind of like what Mike was saying earlier. I think you're right. To the point that, like a lot of our founding fathers did not even, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, for example, considered themselves deists, not Christians. And whenever George Washington talked about God, he almost always talked about God by using the word providence with a capital P. All right, Thomas Jefferson, I don't know that Thomas Jefferson always spoke in that exact same way, but when you read George Washington's own writings, he talks about things that have happened by providence with a capital P. He doesn't really talk about God, but he does talk about some kind of force in the universe that sort of like shoves things along and pushes things along, and that everything just sort of lines up by this like almighty providence. But all right, was it providence that you got a good parking spot at the mall today? Was it providence that you got that job or that you got fired? Was it providence that your kid, that your kid got this teacher versus that teacher, or didn't make the varsity team? And you're right, we kind of overplay the hand of providence. Well, listen, it was just God's providence. Like, listen, I had no idea that making the JV team would eventually lead me to get a PhD from Harvard. Like no, I don't know. I don't really know about that. It's like some of it's just kind of a stretch. And I think what you and Mike are both saying is God's providence is He has a will and a plan for mankind. He might not necessarily care whether this team or that team wins the Super Bowl. Like that's not God's providence, okay? Whoever wins the Super Bowl. But there is a plan for the outcome of all things that the book of Revelation says the end is already decided. The end is decided. Satan loses, Jesus wins, pick your side. Like that's Revelation. That is God's providence ensures that a yet to be tasted victory is assured for us. I finally found the verse I was looking for. It's Isaiah 46. Isaiah 46, verse 8. Remember this and be assured. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things long past. For I am God and there is no other. I am God and there's no one like me. Declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times things which have not been done, saying, my purpose will be established, and I will accomplish all of my good pleasure, calling a bird of prey from the east, the man of my purpose from a far country. Truly I have spoken, truly I will bring it to pass. I have planned it, surely I will do it. That's Isaiah 46, 8 through 11. Yeah, Brian?
When we studied the how we got the Bible, of course, God says, my words will not pass away. Mm-hmm. And He made that promise. And the one story that sticks out in my mind, people were saying, what a coincidence that was. And sometimes I think we misinterpret sometimes it's coincidence or providence. Because when Constantine Tichidor just happened to find that New Testament manuscript, I think it's a Sinaitic.
The Sinaitic, Codex Sinaiticus.
Right before they were going to burn it.
Yeah, he found it in a trash pail, essentially. They were going to burn it.
People say, wow, it's quite a question. Well, sometimes it stands out to you, but then other times it doesn't.
Yeah. And has that brought about greater understanding of the Scriptures and more opportunity to learn? Yeah, absolutely. Justin, go ahead.
I was going to just play off what Gary said, because I totally agree with the fact that it is misused. And sometimes deliberately and sometimes indirectly. I think a lot of times it's emotionally done. Because to your point, when you lose a loved one or something like that, you might try to get through something where you just pawn it off as, well, it was providence. God
You're desperate. You're looking for a reason.
For something to cope with. It's a coping mechanism. And then the other is, you look at like the Crusades, and it was, well, God wanted us to kill those people, and God wanted us to do all this. And so, it can be a very dangerous scenario if you're not using it correctly and not seeing it correctly for what it is. If you're looking back with the right mind and the right heart, looking for God's handiwork in His creation and in His workings, like you said, turning those small things and using people, then you have the right mindset. You're looking for God. Whereas if you've got an idea of what you want to have happen, and then you're like, well, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and then it happens, and like, it's providence. No, that was you making something happen that you wanted to have happen, and calling it God's work. Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, you're right. In the Crusades, one of the rallying cries of a lot of the Crusaders was "God wills it." Mm-hmm. And in medieval England, for example, one of the methods in the court of law of determining someone's innocence was through various crucibles. One of which was to stick somebody's hand in boiling water, and depending on how well the hand healed over the next few days, it would determine whether you were innocent or not, right? God would show, like, hey, listen, if you're innocent, God will show it. Just stick your hand in a pot of boiling water, and God will show it by, So you're right, like, stuff like that is, we kind of pile a lot onto providence. Now, the story of Esther, I think, is one of the clearest examples of providence in the Bible. And I think that's the reason why the story is there. Some people question because God is never directly mentioned in the book. And so people over the centuries have questioned its inclusion in the canon of Scripture, even the ancients. It was, in fact, the last of the books of the New Testament that the Jews included in the canon. It was the very last one that they finally accepted as part of the Hebrew Bible. So there has always been some resistance to it in the Scriptures because it's such there is a curious and unique opaqueness to God's work in the story, and yet His handiwork is clearly seen by providence. And that I think is the greatest blessing of all in this book, is that God doesn't need to always do some great miracle. Can God do a miracle? Yes. Red Sea crossing, Mount Sinai, sun standing still, Jesus walking on water. Okay? Can He? Yes. But does He always? And is a miracle always the most compelling way for God to behave and interact with mankind? I think the story of Esther proves that often, more frequently, God's handiwork is shown not in great acts of miracles, but more in these small providential adjustments and nudges and interaction that God has with mankind.
I don't recall any miraculous accounts in Nehemiah or Ezra, though, was it? Or is it? I mean, I see providence with Him being the cupbearer.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Was there any miraculous?
I don't think there were any miracles in Ezra or Nehemiah. No, there's no miracles. But, I mean, God is certainly mentioned. They talk about God a lot. Yeah. But, yeah, the fact Esther...
well, they're reading the law in Ezra.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they're reading about it. So, interestingly, a lot of people point out in the text of Esther, God is never even once directly mentioned in the book of Esther. And yet, in actuality, the Lord is in the text. It's just not obvious. Well, God, I'll keep this brief, okay, because this is a little bit of a nerdy deep dive, so I'll keep this very, very brief. Is anybody familiar with what an acrostic poem is? You know what an acrostic is? An acrostic is where the first letter of a line in a poem gives you like a secret code, okay? If I was to say, I saw you run yesterday around noon, built into this statement, is there a name built into that statement? I saw you run yesterday around noon. Yeah, Ryan, okay? And you can just look up online. There are a lot of acrostic poems out there. Just look up acrostic poetry. And acrostic poems a lot of times are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. It's where the first letter is the letter A. A friend of mine was back in my house. Couldn't he defend my, I'm just purely off the top of my head. Okay, can you tell? It's not exactly. No, not at all. But acrostic poetry, the first letter of either a line or the first letter of a word will include like a secret code for you to find. And 4 times in the book of Esther, Yahweh, which is the sacred name of God, the tetragrammaton, the word Lord, right, as we have it in most of our English Bibles, is found 4 times in the book of Esther in the first letters of a sequence of words. And all of the phrases are really interesting, and they reveal actually God's providential working. The first example is in chapter 1 and verse 20, where one of the advisors, a Gentile, mind you, one of the advisors to King Ahasuerus tells him, all wives will honor. And the first letters in reverse, this is backwards, obviously this is English, not Hebrew. So just for the sake of me illustrating it, I'm just saying here in English, the first letter of each of these words in reverse is Yahweh. And then in chapter 5 and verse 4, a Jew is saying this, and it's forward, let the king and Haman come. And the first letter of each of these words is Yahweh going forward. Okay? In chapter 5 and verse 13, in reverse, again, a Gentile saying this Haman, this avails me nothing. And the name Yahweh is the first letter, but in reverse, backwards. And then chapter 7, verse 7, a Jew speaking this, evil was determined against him. Yahweh is each of the 4 letters in that way. And each of these phrases indicates essentially like a narrative waypoint in the story, but also a moment where God is clearly and providentially working through something that all wives will honor. And because of the situation with Vashti, Esther gets brought in and creates the impetus for saving the Jews. Let the king and Haman come. Again, this is another example of God nudging, moving the story forward. This avails me nothing. Yeah, no kidding, Haman. Good. You don't even recognize God is backwards working against you, right, to bring this about. And evil was determined against him. Again, that's God working providentially. So, take that for what it's worth. I think it's an incredibly compelling argument when you look at it in the actual language. So take that for what it's worth. We won't spend any time here. If we had time, I was going to open it up for other examples of providence in the Bible similar. But let's go to a second example. And I brought this up in our very first class earlier in the quarter, so we'll go quickly through it. I think one of the great themes of not only Esther, but Ezra and Nehemiah as well, is that when heroes are needed, often it's regular people who rise to the occasion. We don't know a lot about Zerubbabel and Joshua, right? Before they led their people home, before they led 42,000 people back home, we just don't know a lot about them. We just know almost nothing of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king. Maybe that means that he was, somebody who'd been castrated and had no family, and I don't know. But you don't know hardly anything about Nehemiah. You don't know much about Ezra. He was trained and educated. Esther, her name in Hebrew is Hadassah. We just don't know anything about her either. She lived in obscurity. She was just an orphan raised by a relative, and she happens to have very noticeable, beautiful features. These are just normal people, unimpressive to the world, normal people who nevertheless took on monumental challenges, and they crossed deserts and crisscrossed empires and built cities and faced enemies and went before kings and spoke candidly to them at risk to their own lives. Each of them contribute to the spiritual and material renewal that takes place for God's people, and they fulfilled some small part of the divine plan. I think that's the second important theme in Esther. So let's talk a little bit about the historical context of Esther. And we will, of course, start with this same chart that we've looked at lots of times, but it's good to anchor ourselves in history and know exactly where we are, because if you're anything like me, the difference between 550 and 450 BC can sometimes be, just it just washes over you sometimes. So we are right about here, okay? Xerxes is the Ahasuerus. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Xerxes is the Ahasuerus of the story of Esther, okay? Xerxes became king of Persia in 487, 486. Again, these dates, they're a little bit mushy sometimes. 487 to 486, give or take. And he reigned all the way until 465. And Esther is somewhere here in this time period, okay? This, of course, is in the year 485. This, of course, is the territory of Xerxes. He ruled a massive, massive land area that's essentially the size of Eurasia. He ruled over Egypt, all the way from modern day Turkey to the very frontier of Greece, and all the way into modern day India. And so he covered a massive area. He had several different capitals, by the way, Susa and Persepolis being the most notable of them. He and his father, Darius the Great, contributed greatly to Susa and Persepolis and a lot of the buildings that you can, if you want to go to Iran, you can still see the ruins of Susa and Persepolis. We'll take a look at a couple pictures in a moment to give you a on-the-ground view of that. So, Xerxes is the fourth king of kings of the mighty Achaemenid dynasty, starting, of course, with Cyrus. And he reigned from around 486 to 465 BC. He was the son of Darius the Great. He was best known for his history-defining conflict with the Greeks, including his victory over Leonidas the Spartan at Thermopylae, where Leonidas led 300 of his own personal guard, as well as about 5,000 other Greeks. The story 300 gets that a little mixed up. There were like 5,000 to 6,000 Greeks who actually came with Leonidas, and he just happened to have 300 of his own Spartan troops, because the day that he left, it's a long story, the day that he left was actually a big festival in Sparta. It was a holiday, and so he didn't want to take his whole army away from the family, so he took 300 of his own personal bodyguard, and then met up with some other Greeks along the way. So there were really more like 5,000 to 6,000 at that battle, but it was still an overwhelming defeat for the Greeks. And after that, Xerxes thought he was unstoppable, and he went on to Athens. The Athenians abandoned their city and went on to the island of Salamis for refuge. And while they were there, Xerxes burned the city of Athens to the ground, including destroying the Acropolis, where all the monuments and temples were. The city was lightly defended, and the citizens, by and large, survived the battle by hiding on Salamis. Not that much longer, though, in 480, really that was the same year, the great sea battle at Salamis was fought, and the Persians were soundly defeated by a much, much smaller Greek naval force. Because of this defeat, Xerxes left in retreat. He left an army behind to try and defeat the Greeks, but it was at that point not going to happen. So he went back to Persia, and instead of subjugating the Greeks, he licked his wounds back home by building stuff. Because when you're the most powerful person in the world and you're going home with some smarts, you go home and lick your wounds and go build a monument to yourself. Yep, go build another palace and make yourself feel better, okay? So that is why Xerxes is really most famous. He built the Gate of All Nations. This is in Susa. Is it Persepolis or Susa? Susa, I think. Hold on. I remember writing it. Okay, Persepolis. Sorry about that. It turns out I just don't remember everything off the top of my head. He built the massive Gate of All Nations in Persepolis. And you can just see for size, there's some people right here. It's really big. This is called the Apadana, which is a great hall in Persepolis. Probably one of the largest buildings in the whole city. maybe one of the most impressive buildings in the entire world when it was, not just a few columns. This is probably what the Apodana looked like in its heyday. It was covered in beautiful glazed tiles and mosaics, and so it was probably very brightly colored in its time. This is called the Takara. This was the winter palace. I believe Darius, his father, started to build this, but Xerxes was the one who was left in charge of finishing it, the Takara, the winter palace in Persepolis. And then we get to Susa. Susa was his other capital, one of his other capitals, and this gives you a sense of the scale of his palace in Susa. Those are his ruins, and this is probably what the palace looked like in its heyday. So, from this down to this, still, you really get a sense of the scale when you see pictures like this. So this, in Susa, this is where the story of Esther takes place. Susa is mentioned in chapter 1. And so this, you can imagine that this kind of scenery, lush gardens and fountains and a city surrounding it, and an imposing structure that sits over the whole city. This is where Esther's life happened, once she became part of Ahasuerus' harem. Any thoughts? You have any other interesting historical anecdotes about Persia you want to throw in before I move on? Is this interesting at all? Yeah. Does anybody find this? I think it's really fascinating, but I love history, so I'm a nut for this kind of stuff.
Well, I was going to say that I thought one of the things was Ezra's extreme faith.
Mm-hmm.
Not knowing she's going to die.
Yeah.
When she went in front of the king.
What I like about that is to be a hero of faith. Sometimes I think we think you have to suffer all the time, and Elijah, always suffering, always for John the Baptist, miserable, and Paul the Apostle, shipwrecked and beaten and 39 stripes and thrown in prison. And Esther had a really comfortable life, okay? Can you live a comfortable life and still, when the time comes for you to do what is right and put it all out there and risk everything, can you still show your faith? Now, I'm not saying, all things being equal, I think that faith tends to thrive a little bit better under harsher circumstances. Faith is sort of like a muscle, that the more it gets worked, the stronger it is. But Solomon was blessed by God with wealth. God gave him his wealth. So God didn't give Solomon something that is inherently a stumbling block. It's not like God said, because you're so wise, I'm going to give you wealth also. And you'll discover the secrets of that in a few years. He gave him wealth because he cared about Solomon, and he wanted Solomon to be enriched and comfortable. He blessed David. Remember, he told David, if this has not been enough for you, I would have given you more. So wealth is not an inherently bad thing, and you can be a person of deep faith, even in the midst of circumstances that are very comfortable. So I think that that's some reassurance to me, because when I read Matthew 19 and Jesus said, it's harder for a rich person to go to heaven than for a camel to fit through the eye of a needle, that leaves me feeling a little bit despondent over my life's conditions. That's a good point, Kim. And Brian?
I just wondered, who wrote the book of Esther? Her?
Probably not.
Was it maybe dictated to someone?
It was, we don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that,
oral history maybe?
The answer to that question probably lies in what theory you subscribe to about what is the point of Esther and what is the literary form of Esther. Right? Theories abound of, was this just purely a fictional story? Was it a historical drama, historical romance? Was it propaganda? Was it history? Was it history with some embellishment? Now, I mean, I know where I stand on that. I take it at face value as a retelling of actual events. But, depending on how critical you are of the text, your answer of who wrote it would probably be different. Yeah. Now, the Xerxes of, do I have a slide on this? Okay.
So who put the comment about Esther took place in Ezra 6, between 6 and at the end of 6 and 7, where it says that this is the time that Esther took place. So was that just stuck in there after the fact, or was that written by the person?
You're talking. So which translation are you using?
New King James. It says more than 50 years elapsed between chapters 6 and 7. During this period, the events in Esther took place.
Oh, you're not. Are you in Ezra or Esther?
I'm in Ezra.
Ezra. Okay. Yeah.
So the person in Ezra knew about Esther, or who was around him, because it's talking about Esther.
Yeah, that is. That would be an editor's note in there. Okay. New American Standard doesn't have that editor's note there in Ezra, at the end of Ezra chapter 6. Although you are correct in pointing out that there quite a bit of time has passed between the end of chapter 6 and chapter 7, and that is conceivably when the story might have taken place. Although Ezra chapter 7 probably takes place in about 457 BC, and we are, we're not quite there yet, because remember we had talked about Xerxes being, what year did we say? 460. Yeah. So, yeah, I think your editor's note is probably generalizing a little bit. Probably not that specific spot is where it takes place. Xerxes is the Ahasuerus. On the next slide, I actually have an explanation, which we hopefully will get to. I'll be very quick about this. But history shows that he was a man of passionate extremes and big ideas. He was a king who wanted to conquer. Like that, I mean, he was like all about, I want to conquer stuff. When he saw Greece and that his dad Darius couldn't conquer Greece, he's like, I'm going to do it. And he went nuts, and he tried to make a pontoon bridge across the Bosphorus. And when a storm destroyed it, you know what he did? He actually got whips out, and he had someone go up to the sea, to the Bosphorus, and whip the Bosphorus, I think, 300 times to discipline it. Like literally, he had somebody discipline the water, and then they threw a bunch of chains in, and then he said, now build it again! And then they built it again, and this time it worked, and that's how he got the Persian army to cross into Greece, was actually on a pontoon bridge. So I mean, he was a guy who was like, he had wild, crazy ideas, and it's like, I'm going to conquer this. I'm going to build this. And when things didn't work, he said, well, throw more men at it. Make the army bigger. Make it bigger. Build another one. And it was just like, that's just how he lived. And so when you read about Ahasuerus and Esther, it's like, it definitely fits. This is a guy who, like, brought out his beautiful wife to show her off naked to all of his friends. And then when she made him mad, he goes, divorce her and get rid of her. He was a guy who in one moment said, yeah, sure, kill all the Jews. And then like, no, wait, don't kill all the Jews. He was like, he was just all over the place. And that's kind of, he was just a very larger than life figure. And yet he was a capable ruler. And he did maintain the glory of the Achaemenid fame throughout his time. And his rule was a success. He is considered Xerxes the Great. So we will start class on Sunday with some critical considerations about the text itself, because Esther is, and I say this with reservation because I don't think it's problematic, just so you know where I stand on that, but in terms of textual criticism, Esther is probably the most problematic book in the entire Bible in terms of its place in the canon and its credibility as a text. So again, you sure you know where I stand on that? We do need to talk about it though, so that we can maybe defend it and kind of answer some of those kind of critical questions about it. Okay, so that's where we'll start on Sunday, and then we'll get to chapter 1. Okay, thank you, everybody. Hey, man.
Hey, you too. All right, I'll be on.
Yep. Thank you. That is good. I have kidding. I'm many things, but boring is not one of them. Or boring is one of them.
Talk like, you know, history, stuff like that. I'm not a history person. I'm not. I know a lot of stuff. Like, Joe was talking to today. I was like, oh yeah, that was so and so and so and so. I said, took history in school. I mean, I remember a lot of stuff I learned.
Yeah,
a lot of it's gone out, but I mean,
yeah.
Anyway. Well, I'm very interested. I'm glad you got it.
Yeah. It's gonna push us out of our comfort zone, and I think it's gonna lead to the next kind of big evolution of our family. And sometimes I just found that sometimes moving makes you level up in your spiritual maturity, and that's what I'm trying to do for the kids and for myself. And hopefully for East Shelby also. I always never forget. I love you. No, I love you too.
You know that. All right, I'll talk to you more later.
All right.